Welcome everybody again. I'm going to host this discussion now. Our speaker is going to be... Sorry, you have to go. Okay. Our guest is moving a little bit. In the meantime, she is moving. I'm introducing her. Ágnes Gagyi, who is working at Gothenburg University. Plus, she has founded the Solidarity Economies Center and has been working on solidarity economy and such issues in a comparative manner. Unbelievable amount of knowledge she has accumulated in this. This is why we invited her. My name is Attila Melegh, and I'm one of the organizers of this conference, plus I work at non-cooperative workplaces like Corvinus University or at the Demographic Research Institute. But we can see that everything can change. With this, and of course we would like very much your contribution. So we are going to talk a little, and then you can come up with comments and questions concerning the film. Plus, very importantly, people online can also write in questions, which are going to be read here, and then Gagyi can answer that. And the very first question I would like to ask from Gagyi is the following. It's very much related to the conference topic. So, is this the way toward mixed economy or not?
Now the air change.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Actually, we co-founded this Solidarity Economy Center with many other people, and we accumulated this knowledge together. So also, Daniel was there in the back, and I think you did the research on Fagor, so correct me if I'm wrong. So is this the way to the mixed economy? Actually, what we think about the mixed economy is still a question to me, and maybe there will be more discussions in the coming days. The way we posed the question for ourselves was, is this something to engage in if we want to work towards systemic change? And okay, you are in Hungary, you are in our position, you don't have much to lose in terms of starting from zero wherever you go. So we decided, yes, for us it's important. But if you look at how the movie speaks, it's rather a PR movie. Like, you know, it shows different examples of cooperatives, and then it tells you that they are growing. As if the growth story of Mondragon would be the same story as these new worker cooperatives in the US. And then, for instance, the huge cooperative stories of Latin America or India and Eastern Europe, China, also this World Bank driven cooperative projects, even in Africa, they are left out. And the way we see this is that using people's collaborative power to sort of make up for the insufficiencies of the market can be a good thing and can be a bad thing. It is a bad thing in terms of this fact that it always multiplies when there is a crisis. It sort of serves as a buffer for the capitalist crisis, and then what it produces in terms of demographic sustainability and such, it is sucked back to the market when the another boom period arrives. So here, for instance, if you saw in the US, the old cooperatives, they were from the 80s, because that was the wave when many were made. And some of them survived and really served as these long-term laboratories, and where knowledge was piled up, and then they could be used in the next crisis that was after the 2008. And it is not the same position and not the same possibilities as the Mondragon, which is quite unique actually in the Western Hemisphere, becoming this global multinational. And what I wanted to mention in terms of how you go forward when you are in such a moment of crisis, how they multiply, well, empirically, even in the case of these US ones, it is not individual innovation. Like we see a multiplication of worker cooperatives, they don't happen as, you know, small islands of 5 to 10 people starting cooperatives independently. But the way they happen is that there is a generation of cooperatives from some sort of background, which in the US is typically partly this long-term cooperative thinking and, you know, economic democracy thinking finding its field again in the new crisis, and partly through philanthropic investments that came into these fields. And then they were organized by specific initiatives, like where they multiplied the most, there was something. Like in Colorado, there was the Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center. In Cleveland, it was a collaboration between a big philanthropic donor and the Democracy Collaborative, speaking with the state of Cleveland to create this kind of ecosystem development using the big anchor institutions around which these evergreen cooperatives could be planted. You have this sectorally too, coming from places where cooperatives have been strong traditionally. In the US, for instance, this was in agriculture, like in the dairy sector or in electricity. And then where you had some local long-term sectoral innovation and tradition, then in this period, they started to have projects to develop nationally. And this happened in food and other sectors also, but also in sectors like resident-owned community co-ops that started from New Hampshire, and they do mobile home community cooperatives for people who live in trucks. And that grew from 2008 into 21 states with 300 cooperatives, 20,000 member owners and such. So this is a new growth in the crisis. And the question is, other than occupying this buffer position, what is going to be the next step if they are supposed to be transformative?
Thank you very much. Of course, this immediately gives me the chance to ask about next steps. Because, and then let's do it in a little bit detailed manner. So we all agree that these forms are very much in a marginal position and in kind of a buffer position. And we can see that it's not moving out, regardless of the fact that it has been extremely widespread, with the sole exception of, when there was non-capitalist institutional frameworks. What I would like to ask about is first about, do you see what are the key macro institutional guarantees or conditions that such forms can spread or can be more important than what we can see today?
Yeah. I will answer in a way that you can think of, even if you don't have the macro institution. I mean, you don't have a state to work with, which is most of our cases, I'm afraid. But the main thing is that the cooperative, the main economic benefit, social economic benefit of the cooperative is not about having a small company in which there are democratic relations and otherwise you are an island in the capitalist sea and all the external rules of the capitalist sea you have to apply to yourself, otherwise you drown. But the big idea is that you are trying to occupy more and more space within the economic circuits, that you can operate differently from the capitalist logic. So the cooperative ideally wouldn't be one worker cooperative operating a bakery or a pub or something, but it would be, for instance, an agrarian consumer producer cooperative where the producers and the consumers are linked, and this creates a mass of economic circulation that can be governed differently from the normal food market. And this is how, when you start building cooperative logic, sooner or later you notice that, oh, we also need this function, otherwise it's too much. Sooner or later everybody wants to start a bank because everybody needs capital, and the way you can access capital on the normal capital market is completely detrimental to cooperatives. But you also need other functions, and this is how all these success stories, as they are building up, the story was about how they build out those other functions. So in order, the main macro condition for cooperatives is to create bigger and bigger circuits that work within the cooperative logic. And actually this is what all these cooperative development initiatives that I mentioned do. And if you also have a state that wants to do it, this is what these states also do. That you provide all kinds of ecosystem services for the cooperatives to thrive, from educating members to providing sector-relevant technical advice, financing, building out all the ecosystem externalities that any single cooperative needs.
I'm sure that we are going to come back to many issues, whether with this kind of gradual spread, the corporate logic can be actually broken, and what's going to be what about the other actors? What are they doing while they are trying to get into key positions in an economy? So we can actually think about it. But I think it's very important to start the thinking about these institutional guarantees concerning, financial markets, concerning various points which we learn about global capitalism at the moment. But let's leave it for the discussion, right? I don't want to occupy it too much. Let's move to another thing. So from these case studies, what kind of things we learn in terms of initiatives? Which are the key, let's say, micro conditions and even historical conditions which can help such initiatives? While I was watching these case studies, I was thinking about various things, like, is there a sector-specific thing in this, size, some kind of communal background which is needed, or what are the key things? So concerning this, I'm sure that you have learned a lot, so I would be very happy in case you could share some of the insights concerning this.
Actually, to be honest, I don't have any deep insight on where to start from, because the examples are completely different based on where they could start from. What you see is that when there is a crisis, people start building cooperatives, there's a cooperative wave, and when they get stronger, in the crisis there is space for them because nobody wants to hire those people. And when they get stronger, they can also reach some regulatory benefits, and if they remain stronger, they can keep it as such, which is important. Another thing that we see is that, for instance, Mondragon started from machine building already, but that's quite high level. Globally, it's more on the less capital intensive, typically food production side. But what is also interesting is that when they try to click the different functions together, then there is this prioritization of the primary needs, especially in the global south, where actually most of the volume of the cooperative experience happened. So there are these initiatives that even if we have a cooperative system in which we have everything from airplanes to plantations, the first priority is that the food production is enough for all the workers. And within the cooperative system, that's how we circulate the resources. Maybe that's not what it is.
No, I'm just, no answer is an answer. That is to say, in case you don't see specific things concerning it, that's very important. But actually, I think you have hit something very important, and that's the crisis point, and then, of course, the issue of crisis management. Because this, I think, is super important, but I give back the mic to you because you want to say something.
No, I do see specific things. I just don't think you can formulate it in an abstract way. Like one of the things in this US wave was that many of the small companies went bankrupt, and then you had some chance to cooperativize the small companies, and that's also, it was an opportunity identified by these background institutions. So lots of constructive work went into cooperativizing those ones, and that's why you have a higher number of enterprises that were cooperativized, but those enterprises are smaller. There was also an idea about the silver tsunami, that the boomers are going out of business in small businesses, and they see that it's a crisis and the end of the world is coming and everything, so maybe they are interested in giving their companies to cooperatives instead of just selling them on the market. So this is very conjunctural in what position you are, what kind of company you can inherit, and what the people who are helping you are focusing on, because that's where you can get help.
I think we will come back to this during the discussion. I have one more question concerning the next step. This is where we started, and then I think that should be the question. So, in your view, without having an even bigger crisis and then having a massive institutional change, which is surely needed in order that these movements can survive, what can be, in your view, the next step on let's say, on a smaller scale at the moment? And then, because I know that you have such ideas, so could you please share us?
Yeah, so I think we do have the bigger crisis. The problem is rather that it's super hard to build these alternative islands fast enough. They are always this minority element, and you cannot really isolate them from the dominant capitalist logic. They can grow more in crisis, but that's still limited. And then you hear these people speaking about their normal jobs, how it used to be, that you don't have anything, you have to do what they say, and when there is profit, it's not yours. When they bring a decision, it's not yours, and when the crisis comes, you're on the street. Well, that's still most of the people. The most of us work in this system that is going in the wrong direction, and that is creating the crisis that is bad for most of us, but for your mere biological livelihood, you just cannot detach it from it. This is the majority situation. And so if thinking of what you can do within the economy, organizing from within the economy, then yeah, I think our idea in this Solidarity Economy Center is really to connect it with the union movement, because just the alternatives themselves, they are never strong enough to cause the change. And the unions themselves, they cannot build the alternatives. And the way we think about this is a bit similar to what was the example here with the United Auto Workers and Mondragon Cooperation, but it is basically this long-term collaboration between the union and the cooperative movement. But by now, the way they pronounce it is not only to, ameliorate the situation of employees, but basically they speak about changing the system as soon as possible. So there needs to be resistance within the normal economic forms, and when you do that resistance, you also at the same time have to push for steps that create more space for the alternatives to happen, and then these can be linked in these beneficial circuits that many unions have done in their trajectory, that union members start to own the cooperatives, and then you, as much as you can advance with the union struggle, you strengthen your alternative cooperative background, and the stronger it gets, the more you can advance with the union struggle.
I think this is something important to think about, and of course you need to politicize the unions in a lot of ways in order to have such strategic goals and then to look for the guarantees of that. But with this, I would like to open the floor, because one of the worst things we can do always in very democratic discussions, that we do it in a very authoritarian way. And this, I think, is something important. So let's open the floor for discussions on the film, on the ideas what you have just heard, or additional points you would like to raise. The only thing, I need to give you the microphone, because otherwise online people are unable to follow. Online people can also join and ask questions. I'm just looking around if there's already somebody who would like to make a comment or a question concerning the film, the discussion, the alternative movement in this respect. Yes, there is.
Can I be heard? Okay, so I'm interested about the idea of cooperatives because it's a bit new to me how this works. And in part of your speech, you mentioned about the idea that we need to create some sort of, it has to be a cooperation between the cooperatives and the state. Like there needs to be this type of cooperation. So I would like a characterization as to how much will the state have to have these cooperations if the state has to have them. Like, for instance, I would like to ask maybe labor regulation perhaps, or subsidies, or this type of thing. Like, how much, if the state has to help, how much will that intervention be? And if not, then which is this relation? I would like to know a characterization of how this relation of the state and cooperatives works.
Should we go one by one, or Keith, you would like to ask immediately?
I'm a stranger and I want to hear what other people say.
All right. Okay, so then the first question, and then I give the floor to Ágnes.
Yeah, so of course, the state does the regulation, and for cooperatives to function better and better, you need more and more beneficent regulation. But that is a struggle. It is a struggle within the economy, but it also appears within the state over regulation. So it's not like you can achieve a situation where nothing happens, there is no conflict, the economic system didn't change, but suddenly you have perfect regulation that benefits cooperatives. You just cannot have it unless it is limited to very small segments, like it is limited in social cooperatives in Europe, that basically you get subsidies and you get nice regulation for very limited social sector where basically you are doing a bit of a nice for-profit social work with some subsidies, but you cannot go beyond that. So when you try to cause cooperative-friendly state regulation, you are in the same struggle as unions are. The unions try to cause employee-friendly regulation, and in that they are facing the capitalists, and they are going to meet at the workplace, but they are, and in the economy in general, which capitalists are dominating, but they also are going to meet somehow within the struggles in the state regulation. So it is this constant dynamism, and because it is so, it is a question exactly how much you want to make yourself dependent from the state. So if it is a system of cooperatives that is owned by the state, and then somehow, there is a new government and they just say, oh, we're not doing that part anymore, and then all your cooperatives crumble because they were dependent on the state governance and the state funding, that's obviously not good. So when you're trying to build these bigger and bigger ecosystems of cooperatives that build social power on the side of reproduction, then you try to do it as much independent from the state as possible, while also being able to get from the state as much as you can. And one of the examples that inspires us in this sense is this long-term collaboration in Kerala between cooperatives, unions, and the Left Party, where the idea was that they are in the same movement. So when the Left Party is there, it tries to enhance the space in which cooperatives and unions can grow. But when the party is not in governance, in the governing position, then those guys are can be strong in themselves through the positions that they hold within the economy. And through that, they are political. They can work to put the Left Party back in power. But also when the Left Party is in power, they can also resist it if it does something against them. And most possibly it will, because if you are sitting in the governance seat of any kind of government, then as a state you are managing a capitalist economy where everything is dependent from how that capitalist economy is also integrated into the external capitalist system, and that was true even to state socialism. So you are going to do something against your own subjects that the external capitalist pressure make you do to them. And as a left party, you want to enable them to resist you when you are made to do that. So it's in the commons thinking, in this economic part, there is also this concept that grasps this logic that is called the semi-permeable membrane. So the idea is that you want to build systems that are able to take in power from the outside, let it be just financing or political power, and then keep it inside, don't give it back.
Thank you very much. Other questions and comments? Yes.
Thank you. So I was wondering about the question of scale. Many of these examples are based on cooperatives that actually start to work as multinational companies when they go abroad. And I have seen it also in agriculture, agri-food. So in the dairy industry, for example, where you have Danish cooperatives that are historically very, very important. They are actually operating as the worst capitalist companies when they start to internationalize. So I was wondering if you had examples of actually supply chains, transnational supply chains, or production chains, or whatever, where you would have cooperatives actually structuring or restructuring the international division of labor throughout global supply chains. Yeah, sorry.
No, it didn't. Actually, it was one of our big disillusionments to see how Mondragon is doing it through Fagor as well. but we didn't see each and every example in the world, so maybe there are some. But within regional systems like this Kerala one, we saw these efforts to govern the supply chain in a different way.
Thank you. I want to talk about the film. I mean, the Americans were American, weren't they? They wanted to make work life more human and collectively and individually rewarding. But as far as I got, they had very little notion, as most Americans do, because they're quite insular, of what was going on in the world until it zaps them. And the Basques are different. They were fishing for cod in Newfoundland in the 12th century. They crossed the Atlantic centuries before Columbus, although nobody noticed. And they fought Stalin and Hitler in the Spanish Civil War, which had as one of its main objectives getting rid, there's a history to all of this. It's not just learning how to get on in the workplace, how to make sure that there is some intergenerational transmission, drawing on local history and culture to create a community that supports the cooperative. All this thing is very important, but then Putin smashes Ukraine, and you haven't got a clue what's going on. You just know it's very dangerous, and it's going to be cold this winter. Maybe half America's energy supplies will collapse this winter. I have that information. And at the same time, the politicians who are, as we can see, anybody can see, are incompetent and corrupt and self-interested and have no notion of public values. All they know what to do is rather than offend the people who vote for them, to print more money. They would rather print more money than do something that actually solves the problems that are accumulating in the economy. In this case, since 1980, through the big crash to the bigger crash that is happening now. Now, Durkheim, I think it's very important to start with the local, to start with work, with family, with immediate trade. That has to be the place to start. But we're living, Durkheim said that's the everyday life that we all know. But we also get zapped by things we haven't a clue about. We don't know. With wars, revolutions, economic depressions, natural catastrophes, and we've got plenty of those on the books at the moment. And, the idea that the state is the problem is which is the first thing that co-ops tend, have to solve the local state problem. And it's not the nation. I will talk tomorrow. The idea of national capitalism, which came from the mid-19th century and was the dominant social form of the 20th century, is being replaced by a transnational corporate grab to remake world society. Even the reason why our politics fail is because the nation state was always a contradiction and is being swept away by global forces. And yet most people, our education systems and And you know, I mean, don't give people any chance to face that. I just would like to say, just to come from another place, Manchester, that invented the Industrial Revolution, my home. In the late 19th, early 20th century, they built a completely different civilization. But it wasn't based on workers' cooperatives. It was based on the chapel, the union, and the market co-op. And each of these combine collectivism and individualism. So the chapel was a congregation, but it was also Protestants. Individuals made their own peace with God. The unions obviously had to combine in order to defeat anything that was thrown at them by the bosses and the political systems behind them. But they also insisted you had to own your own tools. They insisted on private ownership of your tools in order to join the union. And the Rochdale pioneers who founded market cooperativism knew that you had to combine in the market, but they built it on private property. So in each case, what you had to solve, and what these three institutions solved, was how do you get from the local to the global? How do you combine? How do individuals engage simultaneously in large-scale social ventures, as well as in those that matter most to them locally? And I didn't get any of that from here.
I think the question is not related. Is it related? No. Okay, then let's first answer this and then we come to your question, right?
Actually, I think in case I reformulated it in a way, it's the previous one. So the state can be a problem, right? So it's something which is just, that the state is not going to protect this because the state is in a very ambiguous position in all these systems. And then how it is, can be solved this, how the global system is can be problematized in this, how this local global connection can be problematized, and very importantly, what the conference is about, ownership, is that, so in this case, the private cooperatives can be also kind of a problem, right? So these were the questions how I put it together, right? And I think we need to consider these questions.
I agree, but I don't have an answer like that.
Okay. Then we are going to keep these questions. I don't want to get out of my role, and I'm a moderator at the moment, so I would not like to go on, but we will have plenty of opportunity to talk about these things, because theoretically these are very important issues which we need to talk about. Okay, then with this I give the floor to the next question.
I have just a smaller question. That in the film, most of the cooperatives were productive companies, or they were somehow in the productive sphere, or they have some product to sell. And so I was just wondering if you think there should be some kind of focus on these kind of companies, because the small initiatives that we have here in Hungary at the moment are not really like that. And so how do you imagine bridging this?
Yeah, definitely we have to do more collective thinking about this. But maybe the difference is where they start from, which is that there are all these small, rather productive but small companies that are defaulting after 2008, and they have a chance to take them over, also because they have big enough donors to help with the financial bridging. And this is not where we started from. Maybe we could try to find the ones who are going to default now. But actually, as I said, with this mobile home cooperative, and of course from the housing work, we know that lots of housing initiatives also started, so that was also part of it. They just didn't feature it in the movie for some reason.
But the movie doesn't feature a lot of things, that's for sure, right? Okay, next question.
Thank you so much. I am Andrew Laksina from the Philippines, and I am currently studying in Corvinus University of Budapest. And I would just like to give some of my insights about the movie and maybe some related questions. In the cooperative sense in the Philippines, it also started at around 1970s and 80s, and I agree with you that when there's a crisis, cooperatives actually spur, because after the martial law is being declared in our country, cooperatives started to grow because the state cannot provide the needs of its people, so cooperatives started to grow. But the film actually projects or present a good number of cooperatives being successful, but I am quite curious on the film should maybe balance on to present in case of mismanagement, because I think the film is quite very positive in a sense that it lacks on how to at least provide some insights on how to address mismanagement, because in the context of in our country, cooperatives, one of the example of the cooperatives during the 90s, that all the farmers are the owners of this land, but unfortunately there are some corruptive practices. So I'm just curious on how to address this mismanagement given in a capitalist logic, and how to initiate a cooperative given in this context, because yeah, we all know that cooperative logic is somehow difficult to pursue given all this global capitalism happening. So in that context, how do we start from it? So yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I didn't do research on the statistics of this new worker cooperative wave in the US, but from the secondary research that I read, which is mostly from the people who are building it, and what they see is typically the ones that they are building. So they would speak like, okay, since 2008 until 2020, we built 300 and 100 more are in the pipeline, which means that, you know, with all these organizing efforts, they are organizing them, and by the time they come out of the pipeline, hopefully they will be able to survive. And this is very much the organizer's perspective. This is not some national statistics where you would see a spontaneous wave of people who just do it because they have to, and then most of it fails. And from our Eastern European experience, it's very much the same. The post-socialist agricultural cooperatives had exactly this type of problems. Some of them were held up for long, but most of them failed like this also because the pressure was very strong. And there are other waves too. So, for instance, in the middle of the 2000s, the EU started to roll out these social cooperative programs where there were very strict limits. What you had to do, it had to be very social, employing at least this many percentage of very marginalized people and so on. And you got, you know, for a starting company in Eastern Europe, quite significant amount of subsidy. So they mushroomed. And then in a few years they cut the subsidy, and most of them just failed economically. And then the ones who survived economically later were also cannibalized politically. But for me, I never thought about the Philippines example because I don't know it well enough, but about this Hungarian agricultural and social cooperative example we have been thinking, and there It is just that the economic foundations are not present. So obviously there would be mismanagement and contradictory interests, and the managers who are just, collecting all the vouchers for themselves, they were one side of these interests. But on the other hand, the whole business in a changing market was becoming impossible to handle in both of the cases. So it wasn't, the problem wasn't with the cooperative format, but with the business model.
It's important, this horror story of East European transformation is something to be kept in mind, that we are talking about how cooperatives could be it now. I'm just looking around whether there are other questions or comments to us. Yes, there is.
It might be a basic question that everyone knows, and I'm just the stupid here, but like, how do you start a corporation? Like, how do you have the starting capital from, if not from the state? Cooperative, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, exactly. So in the textbook or cartoon book format, you and your friends come together, put together your savings and open a bakery, and it's this nice as you saw in San Francisco. And this is not how it happens even in the US in this new worker cooperative wave, because those people who are out of jobs and really need it are not the types who can just put together the savings. Even in statistics, the demography involved in cooperative types of businesses in the US changed in a significant way after the 2008 crisis with this wave, because previously it was mostly white Americans, and now it's mostly colored and mostly immigrant people. And obviously they are from a worse social position. So the way it works in practice this way is that you have this infrastructure that is pushing this as a social solution. In the US, you don't have the European social cooperative model. Obviously, you don't have the social state even as much as we have it here. So it is the philanthropists combined with all these democratic economy think tanks and organizers who somehow figure out the model, and then they try to start to organize with those people. And now I said it in a very alienating top-down way, but this is also true in much more embedded movement type of organizing, like the Cooperation Jackson, which is part of this long-term history of the Black movement organizing economically. But the way they get their money is always, and not only money, but all the other conditions, like how on earth you know how to do it legally, how on earth you're going to do about your cash flow when you never saw one before because you were the employee and you weren't the manager. So all this is somehow provided, and whenever you see a cooperative ecosystem blooming, there is this kind of organizing and extra help with it. And where they get typically the money from globally is either the state, if it's subsidizing it, or municipality, some kind of local development project, or unions which are interested to do it, or some kind of philanthropic donors.
Thank you. Two more questions, first there and then.
Good evening to everyone. I am very much interested about the culture and ideology within cooperatives. So my question is, are there major differences on the concept of cooperativism in like Latin America or Asia or in the US? And does it change over time? Thank you.
My question is, what kind of models you've seen for workers being able to enter a corporation? or cooperative? Because there was one example where you had to put down in the movie $1,000 and the remaining 4,000 would be deducted from your paycheck, and it gave me the impression that there's a threshold and it's not available for everyone to join. And I'm just curious what kind of models you've seen for this. Thank you.
About the regional differences, it's a huge topic and I really cannot say that I know about it that much. But if you just think about the historical differences that Keith just explained, what are the conditions in which these develop? I mean, for instance, now what you have in Latin America, most of it was created throughout the pink tide and what remained within the social power circuits after it. So that would be different from this starting from the ground up again in the US, and it would be different from Asia in terms of China or Eastern Europe, where it was this macro policy part of the socialist development projects. So yeah, maybe we discuss it later, but it's too big. And about how to enter the cooperative. So actually, in the management of the cooperative, entering and getting out is one of the typical questions, because the worker is also an owner. And meanwhile, things happen with the cooperative, but it's not on the stock exchange, but you own a part of it. So it's always a question that when you enter, how you're going to produce your part when it is given to you and what you have to give in exchange. And that's actually depends from the cooperative how they govern themselves. Like you could just say that you put in work. So for the first 2 or 3 years, you get a smaller salary and thereby you produce your own share, or you could bring it. But there is also this limitation that even if you bring a big share, you still only get one vote. And then there is the other question when people leave. So what happens when people leave? Are they going to take their shares with them? Are they going to find someone very fast who to give it to you? Does the share disappear in the other people's shares, and how do you govern it? So that's this very important question of governance. And if the type of cooperative is something that is very high level capital compared to what people have, like for instance a housing cooperative, like you really become indebted for 30 years with your friends to get a housing cooperative, and then one of you leaves, how on earth you're going to divide it? So this is this huge management question which throws light on what I just said, that they can only properly survive in an ecosystem. Because if you would also have an energy cooperative, 3 other work cooperatives that can get finance and then they can pay it back at some point, or you even have a cooperative bank, then this is much more easier than when you have to manage it within just one unit.
Thank you very much. In case there are no other questions, then I think let's save some energy for the conferences for the coming 2 days. First of all, let me announce that tomorrow we can meet here at 11:40, and the program starts with opening, and then we have a keynote, and then we have a lunch break, and then we have brilliant session in the afternoon. Very important, theoretically very important topics are going to be raised. And then we have a break, and then we have one more session, which is going to be just as interesting. And then on Sunday we continue a little bit later. And we start late because we have speakers and contributors from across the Atlantic. Somehow, it's always unfair globally how to organize something. But this is how we could do it, but I think it's very nice in the morning. You can think about it and rethink what you have learned the previous day. For tonight, I would like to just to offer that in case you are interested and you would like to continue discussion, then you can come to Claro Bistro. We can meet in front of the hotel, and then we can walk. It's about 6 minutes walk or something like that. And then, in case you would like to continue the discussion and so on, I think it's very important. So we are going to go there. And what else? Do you have any other questions or comments which you would like to raise at the moment? If not, then thank you very much, Gagyi, for and let's continue either in the bistro or tomorrow at around noon. Thank you very much.